Welcome to America's Top Rebbitzins. May Hashem watch over all the Jewish people and bring all the hostages back home today and give enormous strength to all the IDF soldiers, including Eliezer Raphael ben Emuna, Evyatar Tzadak ben Avishag, Ayel ben Miriam, and Ayel ben Yael Esther. Please click on the subscribe button to subscribe to us on the America's Top Rebbitzins YouTube page, or click follow to follow us on your podcasting app so that you're the first to know when an inspiring new episode is posted. Now, before I introduce today's guest, I realize I have been doing this podcast for almost 3.5 years now, and I have never introduced myself. Never. I've never said my name. I've never said what I do. I've never introduced myself. So today, please allow me to take a moment to introduce myself. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Vera Kessler. I am a life coach. I do transformational life coaching and accountability coaching. I work with women who feel stuck, neglected, on the floor, who are they're living in survival mode. It's hard for them to get up in the morning, and they just want to start thriving and living their lives with joy. They want to recreate themselves, step into their highest, most authentic selves, and I help them get there. So that's what I do. So thank you for allowing me to take a moment to introduce myself. And now I am so happy to introduce my guest. Her name is Chava Green. Chava is an educator, a writer, and a public speaker. She has a PhD in religion from Emory University, where she wrote a dissertation on Hasidic feminism. Her academic and popular work explore the role of gender in Chabad society and Jewish mystical texts. Thank you so much, Chava, for being here. Please tell us more about yourself and what you do.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. So right now I'm focusing on my writing and public speaking. So I travel around the country. I speak to different communities about feminism and Judaism and the feminine. And I'm also a wife and mother. I have three little kids and I live in Philadelphia.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you. And I'm actually really, really excited to speak to you today because we're talking about a topic that I've never done on this podcast before, and I think it's a very, very important topic. We're going to be speaking about Hasidic feminism. I find this concept truly fascinating, and I genuinely can't wait to learn more about it because we know so much about Western feminism, but not so much about Hasidic feminism or feminism from the Jewish point of view. So just to make sure that we're all on the same page, can you please explain to us what exactly is Hasidic feminism and specifically how it differs from the traditional Western feminism that we know and that we're used to hearing about?
Okay, so I'll try to take a 300-page book that I wrote and distill it down into a few sentences. So let me focus on two different pieces. So first, let's talk about how it differs from secular feminism, from the Hasidic feminism. So secular feminism operates on certain paradigms about the self and what it means to be a person. And so those kind of ideas emerge from a secular kind of basis. Hasidic feminism comes out of the Jewish tradition, which believes we have a soul and we are created by God. And so we're starting really from different places. And so what things mean like equality, freedom, they just have totally different textures and meanings. So let's start off with the basic paradigm of secular feminism, which is striving to create the equality between men and women, removing all barriers in society in women's advancement and opportunities. And so the idea of equality in the secular world is that there's no real essential difference between men and women. Any sort of differences are constructed by how people are raised or culture, society, different, historical time periods. And so this idea of equality, I believe, really led to kind of a view of sameness that men and women should be able to do all of the same things. And my perspective from Hasidic feminism, from our Jewish tradition, is that God created men and women with different roles and a different essence. And so Hasidic feminism is not necessarily about equality, it's about equity. It is about equal value between men and women's roles. And the belief that men and women are not in this epic battle of the sexes, we're actually in an epic project together to perfect the world, to perfect God's world. And so in that project, men and women have different components that they're responsible for. And that is the view of Hasidic feminism, which is that we need to first understand and describe what is unique about a woman, and then to elevate women's voices and their role in society in that unique feminine way. And in doing so, we know that the righteous women of every generation are the ones who will bring Mashiach, will bring the Redeemer, the perfected world. And so my goal with Hasidic feminism is that women understand like the broad scope of femininity and of womanhood, and feel empowered and know that they're crucial to perfecting the world.
That is so beautiful. And I love that. I love that that really clear distinction between the equality and Western feminism and the value of different male and female roles in Judaism. We're not saying that men are better or the women are better, but that we're both working together in partnership, but we both have equal and distinct roles. They're separate,
Mhm.
but they're distinct, you know? And I would love to delve more into that, especially the women's role. So what from the Jewish point of view, from the Hasidic point of view, is specifically the woman's role?
Yeah. So what we have, so we don't have words like feminism or femininity in Hebrew. Like these are Western concepts. These are English concepts. What we have in the mystical text is the paradigm of mashpia makabel, giver receiver,
Hmm.
which should be familiar to most people that have heard about kind of Jewish ideas of, womanhood. We talk about mashpia makabel, giver receiver. But what I do is I go deeper into these ideas and try to define them almost from a scholarly level. I mean, that's what I do in my academic work, but also I think that we need to move past kind of basic definitions of a woman's role. Like we could say a woman is a mother and or a wife or a nurturer, and these things are true, but not every woman is blessed to have children. Not every woman is blessed to get married when they think they want to get married. And so I kind of steer away from like a category of identity, and I go more into the characteristics or the modality of what it means to be a woman. So when we think about makabel, being a receiver, there's a few elements to this. So one is being connected to panemius, which is inwardness. And we have this pasuk in Tehillim, Kol kavuda bas melech panima. All of the glory of the king's daughter is panima, within. But so I source all of my ideas mostly from Chabad Hasidus and especially from the Lubavitch Rebbe's talks. And so when he describes this talk, he says, panemius, inwardness, is a capacity to move beyond any sort of surface level reality. It's an idea of authenticity, of looking always for Hashem inside of each situation. And really, as Jewish people in general, we even also men, we're supposed to live with this panemius. But women model that. And that is where our glory comes from. Kol kavuda, what is kavod, is honor, is glory. A woman's glory comes from living with panemius. And so this is the kind of model of being a woman, which is why the sense, the home is so crucial to being a Jewish woman, and kind of this model of femininity is because the home is the ultimate panemius. It's a place where we can be completely ourselves. We reveal our deepest selves in our home, and we also create what I think of kind of as a launching pad for everybody, including ourselves, to kind of go out and impact the world. But our home needs to be a place of complete emes, of truth, of connection, and of panemius. And the women create that vibe in the home. And the Rebbe is very clear that this starts with young girls. It's not just the mother's role. It's like women need to see that they bring that quality throughout their entire life. And the difficulty is that a lot of times we're raised in a Western society where that's not really valued. And we kind of turn on that like girl boss side of like, I'm going to go change the world in like kind of a masculine way. And so part of Hasidic feminism is me personally kind of uncovering that femininity and trying to model what that looks like for women. Because sometimes it can feel hard. It's like a quiet power, seeing what's going to result from your actions instead of kind of quickly trying to fix everything, you know? Um, okay, I could speak a lot about this a lot more. Is there any other kind of elements you would like to pull out from this?
Yes, I love that. So seeing what results from your actions. Can you talk a little bit about that, because yeah, a lot of times we do something and then we just want to do more and more and more on top of what we already did. But you're actually saying the opposite. You do, and then you see what results from your actions. That's
Mm.
such a fascinating concept. Please tell us more about that.
Sure. So we have this idea of that women have bina yasera, an extra quality of bina, which is understanding. Because in the Kabbalistic tree of God's emanations, the spheres, Chachma, that first kind of initial spark of an idea, that's masculine. That's kind of like something that is very revealed. If like someone's a CEO of a company, they have this great idea, that's the Chachma, the masculine, that vision. But a woman's role is Bina. That's the feminine role, which men and women both need to use their feminine side. So when we step into kind of this Bina aspect. It's taking that initial idea, but then kind of seeing, how can I actualize this? How can I make sure this will fit into the world, overcome kind of the barriers that might exist, you know? So it's a much more nuanced approach. And so, let me give kind of a life example. So this morning, my son didn't want to go to school. He was saying he had a tummy ache, but I kind of thought he was making it up, And so I think in the past, when I was a new mother, or sometimes I see my husband will take this approach of kind of, just starting from the end goal, which is you have to go to school. And so you'll kind of start off with, maybe you have your own fears. What's going to happen if he doesn't go to school? Is my day going to be messed up? And so you kind of start off with the kind of masculine approach, which is you have to go to school. Now let's figure out how to make that happen, you know? And the feminine approach, which I tried to use this morning, was I just sat with him in silence for a few minutes. I just gave him a hug. I held him. And I was thinking, what can I do so that he wants to go to school? Not that I have to make him go to school, but that I help him realize that he loves school. That's the Bina. That's seeing what might happen if I just push it forward on him, he's going to resist. And I know that. So I'm using my Bina to kind of see into the future and realize I need to use a more subtle way. So I sat with him, I held him, I said, "What's bothering you about school?" And he said, "Yesterday my Mora wouldn't let me make swords." And I'm like, "Well, that was upsetting. You love swords."
Right?
So I said, "Well, what if you make a sword now at home?" And he's like, "That's a good idea. Let's make a sword out of tinfoil." I was like, "Great idea." So we got out tinfoil. He made a sword. And then he got dressed. He got his backpack on. He went out to the bus, with a little resistance still. But, but we kind of avoided some of that kicking and screaming. And
Yeah.
so that was this feminine quality of Bina.
I love that. It was almost like you're tuning into what somebody else needs. Instead of forcing your own needs, forcing your own agenda, pushing like your way, this is my way, this is what's gonna happen, and we're go, 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 like almost with blinders on, to a
Mm.
more, okay, yes, I still want this thing to happen. I still want this child to go to school, but there's a different approach to it. And instead of like the push approach, it's more of an intuitive, like what's going on behind the scenes, what's happening in the background, what's going on with this person. There must be more than meets the eye, and kind of just being patient with it and allowing it to come out and then working from there with what you have.
Yeah.
Wow. That's next level. I do have to say that's definitely next level. Most people don't think like that. Some people do for sure, but not a lot.
It's hard. And so let me speak to another element of Hasidic feminism, which is that, the whole Hasidic movement was really opening our eyes to the fact that we are in Gullus, and this is not the epitome of Hashem's world. We want to
Right.
be in Geula. We want to be in a redeemed, perfected world. And we're partners in making that happen. So the original model of Geula, of redemption, was Adam and Chava, Adam and Eve, in the Garden of Eden. And Hashem first built them as equals. If you go into Bereshis and you look at how Hashem made Adam, he made Adam and Chava as one being, back to back. They were like a united masculine feminine whole. And then in the second creation story of Adam, he creates Adam, he puts him to sleep, and then he takes Chava out of his side. So we're familiar with that one more, but really we first had them as together. And then what happened second is that Chava was taken out and she was secondary to Adam. So we have this idea in the whole kind of, you know, like mystical flow of reality, which is that first we were created completely one with Hashem, like completely one with our soul when we were in Gan Eden. And then we were thrown out of Gan Eden into a world where Hashem's concealed. And in that process, the feminine became secondary. The power of the feminine became hidden. And
Yes.
Chava, her repercussions of eating from the tree was that she would be subservient to her husband. She would need her husband. And so women did have this kind of secondhand role sometimes in history. And what that means on a more psychological level is that our femininity, the femininity of the world, was kind of buried. And now, as we get closer to Mashiach, to the Messianic period, the feminine is rising. And the mystical sources say that when Mashiach comes, the woman, Ashes Chayil, will be the crown of her husband, a teres Baila. And the feminine mode will rise up and become the primary mode of reality.
Yes.
And so this kind of crazy process we're on, I feel like women today, we are in the battlegrounds of this. We are, our masculinity is like way more comfortable to us because that's how you operate in exile. If you want to be successful, like you've got to make money, you got to put yourself out there, you got to be visible, you got to work, you have to feel like you're conquering the world. But I think we're seeing in so many parts of society, in parenting and politics and all these areas, people want a more feminine approach. We want an approach that is more authentic, more inward, that's panemius, that kind of pulls out like a deeper part of us instead of feeling like the world is constantly pushing on us. How do we speak back to the world and say, no, there's a God, there's Hashem. I have betachon, I have trust. I don't have to figure it all out. You know, we want to move into our feminine power, and it's very difficult because for every morning I like ease my son to school, I have had plenty of mornings where I drag him kicking and screaming. Like, it's like it is really hard to
Yeah.
take the feminine approach, and
Yes.
that's not our fault as individuals. That's, being people who have lived always in gullus in exile, and this is like the next step. Like we want Mashiach.
Now, today.
Yes.
So, I love the example that you gave with your son. And this is so fascinating to me because I also, in my life coaching practice, I also work with women to step into their authenticity, to
Mm.
empower themselves, to be more fully who they already are. We get lost a lot of times in the things that happen to us and the neglect and the people who were mean to us. And this tragedy happened and that they suffered this trauma. I mean, there's a lot that happens to us and we get defeated, we get depleted, we get hardened a lot, and that's not really us. That's not our authentic femininity. So I help women to rediscover their own femininity, and I really love what you're saying. So, in terms of the Hasidic femininity, could you give us some more examples of like maybe how you embody it even, in your life, how you bring femininity to the table?
Yeah, sure. So in general, I struggled a lot growing up. I grew up totally secular, and I was, a big feminist in my college days. And over time, I was kind of feeling there's a lot of anger in secular feminism. There's a lot of fear, that I'm not going to get my place, my voice is not going to get heard, and I struggled with that for a long time. And then I went on this spiritual journey and I encountered Orthodox Judaism. I started learning about Shabbos and modesty, and my soul was just awakened. And I went down this path. And then I started studying Hasidus, and I started realizing that a lot of anger and fear is when you feel like you're not in control, and
Yes.
when you don't have trust. And so I saw that, some of the feminist voices that I struggle with are coming from a place of fear that I'm not going to be valued, I'm not going to be taken care of. And so part of accepting my femininity is first valuing the feminine parts of myself, the parts of me that clean the whole house and do the dishes and take care of my little kids and birth children and do like all of these feminine things that like I'm not getting paid for. Like
Right.
I'm not like, sometimes my husband comes home, he's like, wow, the house looks great. But sometimes it's like, you just got to do these things.
Right.
And, and not feeling resentful, not feeling frustrated, but feeling like I'm creating my home, I'm creating my family, I'm creating another generation, and reframing all of these things as part of my authenticity, my power, my abilities. And then by kind of like digging into that part of me, I I went to graduate school, I got my PhD, and there was a part of me that was always feeling like, am I doing enough? Am I not sharing enough? Am I not being out there enough? And I would just over the years just say, slow down, like wait until it feels right. Because as a woman, I want to come out into the world with panemius. I want to come out into the world when it feels good, when it's coming from a place of pleasure, not like fear. When I feel like this is the right moment, this is the right time, Hashem will show me. And you know, I finished my PhD. I spent a few months. We moved. I had a young baby who was only a few months old, and I felt like so much anxiety of like I have to get out there. I have a PhD in Hasidic feminism. I have to tell the world. Like I'm so excited. Like
Yeah.
everything in my personal life was just like this is such a bad time. Like you have to slow down, and that's really hard. And then at the end of the summer, this was last year, I was invited to be on a podcast. Someone connected me to be on a very famous Jewish podcast. And that after that, people started reaching out to me. People asked me to public speak. And I was like, wow, I could have like pushed to try to get myself out there for months and like probably not very much would have happened. And Hashem decided this was the moment, nothing that I did created that, possibility. It came from Hashem. And
Wow.
so a lot of times we think about the kind of moment to moment choices we make as how do I express my femininity, maybe in a argument with my husband or like, a relationship with a friend. But sometimes I like to step back and think, how am I framing my life? How am I framing my bigger choices? How do I like accept, the limitations and the power of my body and my choice to have a family and allow that to be okay with all of my other desires and know that there will be time for them, and really try to live a more integrated life. I think a lot of times the kind of a masculine approach is like compartmentalizing, like I go to work and I'm my work self, and then I go to home and I'm my home self. And, I really I resist that. I try to kind of bring my pieces together and to be my whole self in all the places I am. And that's possible to give just from a mystical perspective. Um, the masculine is related to Giloy, revelation in the spheres, for anyone who knows about this, if you don't, you have to go down a whole study to learn about this. But in the spheres, we have masculine, which is Zer Anpin, the masculine component, and then we have Malchus, the feminine component. And Malchus is the ultimate receiver, the Makabo, like we were saying.
Right.
But all in Za and Zer Anpin, you have all of the revealed emanations of God. You have Netzach, which is overcoming, and Hod, which is submission, and Chesed and Gavura, which is giving and holding back, and all of these powerful models. But Malchus doesn't really have anything. There's not a particular characteristic of Malchus. We translate it as sovereignty or kingship, but Malchus doesn't have any power of her own. She only has power when she receives from Za, from Zeranpin, from like the higher spheres. But in Malchus actually is the essence of God. That's where the essence is found. Malchus can hold everything. So the masculine approach is kind of broken into different pieces. I kind of see like we need men to kind of differentiate, delineate, bring MS. This is right, this is wrong. Like there's been kind of this masculine approach that, that's why men throughout history have been rabbis, have been like communal leaders, that they take rabbinic positions and like decide halacha. That's like a masculine approach, which is a revealed Torah.
Right.
And the feminine is kind of what I'm speaking to, this integrated whole. There's less of a distinction between all the pieces of our life. As women, we kind of hold together all of these pieces. And interestingly, that's why women are responsible for Jewish identity. That's why when a woman has a child, whatever the identity of the father is, that child is Jewish.
Right.
Because we transmit the essence of Judaism. And so you could kind of see, this has taken me years to kind of piece together all of these
Right.
components. But I like to mention a number of these aspects because I want to show how like men and women have these different pieces, but we fit together. We need both of them. And
For
inside of
sure.
ourselves, we need to really highlight and value both of these components.
That's very, very interesting. I love that because I love, like you were saying in the beginning, the cooperation. Men have their role, women have their role, but then we're not separate beings like living in totally different parts of the country. We're together. We're working together in our home, as you were saying,
Yeah.
in the home, coming together. And that's what I wanted to ask you, like on a practical, like on a tachlis level, like on a day-to-day level, like we're getting up in the morning, we're going about our day, however that looks like to each individual person.
Mm.
I just want to ask you like some more of the, like, how does that appear in like traditional gender roles or even non-traditional gender roles, like how is it that a woman can be feminine in her Judaism, feminine in her home, or maybe she goes to work, maybe she's whatever it is that she does in her job. What does that really like look like on a practical day-to-day level? Like what's her role? Is she, she's not being the man, right? The man is being the man. How can she be the woman? Because I feel like people are going to be listening to this and then, we all, like you said, we live in the Western world. We have to,
Yeah.
get the kids and the dinner and then we have to go to work or we have to run the errands or whatever it is that we're doing. And I feel like sometimes women feel like men. You know what I mean? Like we feel like
Yeah.
men, like we're doing so much. And the man goes to work, comes home, sits on the couch and watches TV, and that's that. You know what I mean? Like, and I feel like
Yeah.
he goes to sleep and then we're cleaning up and we're washing the dishes and the toys and the kids. And if they wake up in the middle of the night, like I feel like all that is on a woman. And sometimes
Mhm.
I really hate to say it this way, but sometimes a woman feels like a man. And I
Yeah.
just, yeah. And I just want to know
Yeah.
like your point of view, like on that, or what it's supposed to look like, and ideally, or what we're supposed to be working toward.
Yeah, I relate to that so much. Um, I was reading a memoir recently of a secular woman who went to the Middle East, and she had married someone Muslim, and she was in there. She was like meeting all of his relatives, and first they were like, "You're too skinny," like it was like really, it was a really funny memoir. But one of the things they said to her, they said she was always like jumping to do everything, and she was so worried about the children, and they lived like a totally different lifestyle. And one of the women said to her this line that was so powerful to me. She said, how can you expect your husband to treat you like a woman when you don't act like one?
Exactly.
And I read that, kind of thinking, wow, I think a lot of us do that. We
Yes,
kind of jump into every situation and try to figure it out, try to fix it, try to take care of it. And we're actually not making space to receive.
exactly.
And so, kind of going back to what we had said before, when you were like, it's really hard to step back and like let things happen, you know, we have a feeling of control. And this goes back to, our relationship with Hashem. How much bitachon can we bring into our day-to-day life, our small moments? It's very easy sometimes on a bigger scale to be like, yeah, things will work out. But when we're jumping in to fix things, when we're jumping in to take care of everything, we're moving into mashpia mode, into giver mode, which is why a lot of women feel like I live like a man, like I'm taking care of everything.
Right.
Why isn't anyone helping me?
Right.
It's really scary to just stop doing things, and because
Hmm.
you're like, it won't get done. Will it? Maybe it will. And so this is a lifetime of work. And so I've been trying to work on this a little bit. So let's say for example, I've gotten to a lot of work recently, and cleaning the house was becoming such a burden. I was so frustrated. I used to have a lot of cleaning help. We moved somewhere where it's very expensive. And I was just like, this just doesn't fit in our budget. And so I was, kind of just not doing as much cleaning. My husband was like, what are we going to do? And I was like, I don't know, I just can't. And my husband was thinking about it. He said, okay, you know what? Why don't we move some of our finances around? I think we should get more cleaning help. And I was like, okay, thank you. You know, like
Okay.
I felt like this is my job. No one else can do it. It's so stressful. And then I just kind of switched into thinking, this is I can't do this anymore. And I just expressed it to my husband, not complaining, not being frustrated, but just like I can't do it. And I waited for him to figure it out. And I also, one of the things that I decided when we got married was I want to know what's going on with our finances, but I don't want to make every decision. I want
Okay.
my husband to make those decisions. And for me, that's been one area where I really feel like taken care of. I make sure that any big decisions that we make financially, that we always discuss it first, and I don't feel at all disempowered or excluded, but I feel like taken care of. Like my husband makes those choices. I don't have to worry about the bills. I don't have to worry about those things. And I think some women feel like, first of all, someone might feel like they're better at taking care of the finances and like that works for their family. But I also think it's kind of an easy win, like an easy area where you can just, say, I want to feel like, I'm taken care of. And so finding those places where it works with your family, with your and your husband's strengths and weaknesses, to find those places where you can just step away from something that's such a burden, that's so difficult. And maybe it means hiring help. Maybe it means finding another resource, finding someone else that can step in and do it. Or maybe your spouse will rise to the occasion, or maybe you're in a really difficult time in your life where you are being called upon to use your masculine traits. I spoke at a Shabbaton last weekend, and a single mother came up to me in tears, and she said,
Right.
I'm a father and a mother. Like it's so hard. And I just cried
Right.
with her because I'm like,
Right.
it is. And for some reason, Hashem is putting you in a position where you have to do both of those roles, and I wasn't going to start trying to give her suggestions because sometimes someone just needs to, you know, get something off their heart.
Yes.
But I also think that we have to turn to Hashem and we have to daven and say, please, please help me feel like I'm receiving from you. Please, please let me receive more help. Please let me receive more money. Please let me receive, and kind of rethinking our role, what's possible. A lot of times we have, I'm sure in your life coaching, a lot of times we have limiting beliefs where we're like,
Yes.
and I looked at my budget. I'm like, we can't afford help, childcare. We can't afford more cleaning help.
Right.
And I just was like, I gotta stop thinking that, because this isn't working. And I'll say
Right.
one more.
It was a limiting belief,
It
and you
was
were
a limiting
limiting your
belief.
abundance in that way. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So I'll say one more piece of this, which is, a feminine mode, which I spoke about Malchus, the lowest sphera, being a receiver.
Yeah.
Why is Malchus connected to essence? Because hidden in the lowest part is actually the highest part. The highest sphera is Kesser, the crown. And the crown and the king are connected, of course, so Malchus Kesser. Inside Kesser, we have two components, pleasure and desire. And so if within a woman we find this aspect of Kesser, so in order to step into our power as receivers, we need to be operating on the kind of, subconscious level of pleasure and desire. We need to be tapped into those things. So when I started feeling like cleaning my house. So by the way, today I cleaned my house and I loved it. It felt great. I was in a different mode. But sometimes we're in a mode where we're doing something and it feels terrible. Like every part of you is, I don't want to do this.
Right.
So as women, our capacity to enjoy the world is very deep, is very powerful. Hashem wants us to enjoy his world. We love, we have more of an aesthetic appreciation for things. We love beauty. Not every single woman, but those things have a feminine component. And so we have a capacity to operate in a more of a flow when we tap into what is pleasurable to us. And actually, pleasure is the inside of ratzin, of will or desire. So by tapping into what we enjoy, what is pleasurable, we actually can figure out what our deeper will is. So this takes a lot of work, and sometimes people go to somatic healers to kind of tap into like that deeper part of us because it's usually hidden under a lot of layers.
Yes.
But there is a part of us that can move with more in tune with our deeper selves. So I'll give an example. I have 3 different writing projects I'm doing. And one of them, I feel like the outside voices are saying, like, you have to finish that project. That's the most important thing to work on. And I will open that document on my computer and I just feel this sense of dread. I'm like, oh, I don't want to do this. Like, it just doesn't, it's not flowing. It does not feel right. And I was
Right.
like fighting that for for a week. I was like trying, and I was just like, this isn't even going to come out good. So I had a conversation with my husband. I was kind of discussing it. And then I spoke to a friend, and she was kind of like, what would be your win? Like, what is something you could do that would just flow? And you would be like, yes, I got this. And I was like, you know what? If I quiet all those external voices, I know that the second writing project is what I really want to do. And you know what? I'm going to risk not finishing the first one. I'm going to risk people telling me that I'm doing the wrong thing because I'm going to follow my inner voice, my desire, like what's pleasurable. And I'm just going to trust, like, for some reason Hashem's making me feel this way.
Right. Right, exactly. There's always a reason. And if you're experiencing some kind of a block or some kind, you have like these certain responsibilities or you're feeling a certain way, it is all from Hashem. It really, really is. And then
Mm.
it's up to us because we have control of our thoughts, speech and action. Then it's up to us to figure out how we're going to deal with what Hashem gave to us. Like he gave it to us. It's a
Mm.
challenge. It's like something for us to rise up from, to grow from. I feel like we're often given these things because this is our chance. This is our chance to rise into our more authentic selves, our higher selves, like to go to overcome these challenges and not just to overcome, but how we overcome those challenges really helps to allow us and enable us to grow as a person. I think that that's beautifully said. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Um, So we have time for one last question, and I just want to ask you, you've been a Hasidic feminist for many years now, and I was just wondering what words of wisdom or life lessons can you share with us that have been the most powerful and life-changing for you?
Sure. So I think I'm going to talk a little bit about women's Torah study
Great.
and creating a direct relationship with Torah.
Okay.
Because we're in a few weeks, we're going to come up to Shavuos and we're going to be, at Mount Torah, receiving the Torah like we do every year. And the idea of the holidays is every year we're supposed to kind of elevate to a higher level. The Jewish holidays are like in this cycle, and we're supposed to kind of step into another plane. And so I've been thinking a lot this year of how am I going to increase my Torah study, and not just, quantitatively, like how much am I going to learn, but more qualitatively. What does it mean? What is my relationship? So I want to share one idea from a talk from the Lubavitcher Rebbe about women's relationship to the Torah. So we know that the women actually received the Torah first. So
Yes.
we were standing on Har Sinai, and Hashem came down and saw the Jewish people, and he actually gave it first to the women and then the men. And the way he spoke to them and what aspect of Torah he gave them was actually slightly different. The women he gave the topic headings. These ideas come from the Midrash. He gave women the topic headings, like kind of like the clickbait, like every cool idea, just like in one sentence or one word. That's what he gave them. And then the men, he gave them all of the details. And between two commentators, we have a difference between the interpretation of why. Why did Hashem, give men and women the Torah differently? So one commentator says, well, the women could not understand as much, so he simplified it for them. And the men, they could understand everything, so he gave them all of the details. And so, as 21st century women, we might bristle at that a little bit, like, excuse me, like we couldn't understand it. So the Rebbe presents this as an idea, and then he says, there's another approach to this from the Mechilta. The Mechilta says he gave women the Rosh Tevos, the headings, just the beginnings, because that's actually how Hashem gives over the essence of something. If you think about planting a seed, you plant a seed not because the ground can't handle more, but because from that seed is going to sprout an incredible tree. That seed has everything inside of it. So when Hashem gave us the Torah, he gave the first two dibrais, and they corresponded to the entire positive and negative commandments. He gave us these kind of small aspects of it because it was an opening to then unfold everything that would come afterwards. So the Mechilta says Hashem gave the Jewish women the headings because he wanted to give them the essence of the Torah, and the headings include everything that come out of it. To the men have a more external, revealed, detail-oriented relationship to the Torah. So he presented to them according to all the details. And he even said it to the men in a harsher voice. He said it to the women in a gentle voice. And so what the Mechilta's point is, which I think is this messianic view, whereas the Midrash is giving a kind of exile view, which is women have lesser ability, which honestly was a concern over the generations of exile. If you go back to the Gemara, they were said maybe we shouldn't teach women Torah. There's those are some of the earlier sources. But now as we get close to Mashiach, there's an idea that when Mashiach comes, the whole world's going to be filled with the knowledge of God. How do we
Yeah.
do that? When women, when non-Jews, when children, when everyone's mind is filled with the knowledge of God. And so we as women have to know that our relationship to Torah is essential. It includes everything. So my takeaway for any women who are learning, who are listening to this, would be that this Shavuos, find some new aspect of Torah that you never explored before. Maybe it's Musar, maybe it's Perkei Avos in depth, maybe it's learning Chumash with Mafarshin, maybe it's learning Hasidus, maybe it's opening a Tanya, something that you've never explored because you have a relationship to every single aspect of Torah and it has something to say to you.
That's beautiful. I love that. And everybody could begin where they are. If you're just a beginner, you could begin at the beginning. There's
Sure.
really you know? And
Yeah.
if you're more advanced, of course, you can dive in and explore more in depth. But I agree. There's really, really something for everybody here. I love it. Thank you. I really, really appreciate all the information that you shared. And thank you so much, Hava, for joining us at America's Top Rebbitzins. It was really, really fun to have you here with us today. And may Hashem watch over all the Jewish people, bring all the hostages back today, and give strength to our IDF soldiers, including Eliezer Raphael Leib ben Emuna, Evyatar Tzadok ben Avishag, Eyal ben Marilyn, and Eyal ben Yael Esther. Thank you so much again.
Thank you.